I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. Thank you so much for making the time to come see me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, really a funny thing happened for you listeners. There was a bit of a snafu in our booking, and so I'm over at our house, just about to jump in the ice bath, take a little break, and then I get your text like, "Hey, I'm here at the studio," and I was like, "Studio? What? Podcast today?" I had no idea. I don't know if that's ever happened. So I'm really glad we were still able to get it in, and you weren't like, "Dude, I only have an hour."
Yeah.
So yeah, how's Austin been treating you?
It's been great. I've been enjoying the cold weather. I mean, I love the desert. I love cold weather, and good food. Really good food. We got into some delicious meals.
Downtown Austin has great food.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
That's the benefit of having kind of a culturally liberal, artistic city in the middle of a bunch of rednecks. No, I'm just kidding. But it is. I mean, you get like outside of downtown Austin and there's nothing to eat unless you prefer like
Chick-fil-A,
GMO, glyphosate, and canola oil. So yeah, downtown Austin is a great place for culture, food, art, music,
vintage stores.
Vintage stores.
Oh my God, I went back to high school. I used to go to these Goodwill donation centers and just seek out all of these designer pieces, and then I created my own little store in downtown Santa Cruz. I would sell vintage, for years. I was like going around and through college, and it's all since gone. I've kept the best pieces. They're in my closet now, but I had a whole thing, so I like to go down memory lane.
That's cool.
Very good vintage.
Yeah, I used to do quite a lot of thrift store shopping myself. Yeah, back in I guess it was in the early 2000s. Yeah, I was pretty obsessed. I'd drive out to the suburbs of LA, like East LA was great.
Oh my God.
I went through this phase of it's like when the movie Swingers was out, and there was like all this kind of resurgence of swing music and rockabilly and stuff like that. So I went through this brief sort of Guido 50s leisure suit period.
Totally, with like the crepe button-ups.
Totally.
So good.
And I'd go out to East LA and find that stuff, and like in all the Latino thrift stores. And
the Valley has had great vintage. I grew up in North Hollywood.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, LA girl.
And then moved to Santa Cruz when I was 10. So, but there was like a going back and forth.
Yeah. And now you're in Miami, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just realized we're actually making a podcast, and I'm just sitting here shooting the shit. There is so much to cover, but I don't really get a chance to get to know someone for a few minutes, and this is that, getting to know someone.
Totally.
This is the small talk that precedes talking about birth.
The big talk.
Dun, 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 dun. So I think I found you on Instagram. And for those not following you yet, we'll put a link to your Instagram in the show notes. And we're going to call the show notes today, by the way, lukestory.com/birth. And everyone can find any links and her website and social and any books or references we talk about. What made you want to become a doula? And maybe define what a doula is for those listening. It might be kind of nebulous for people that are outside of those circles. What is it? How'd you get into helping people make babies?
So on a really basic level, a doula is a physical and emotional support person who's trained in natural normal birth, meaning not higher intervention, not complicated, just kind of the natural unfolding of birth. So we hold space for couples and families, women who want support during the pregnancy, and then through the actual birth itself, through labor, and then sometimes postpartum. And the reason I wanted to get into that was because I had been photographing birth for some time and felt that where I really wanted to be was in that very specific field with the woman and her partner and whoever was there, if there was a medical attendant like a midwife or an OB at the time, and wanted to support that process. And as a photographer, I very much fly on the wall. I had a lot of experience in photography. That's what I did before I started doing this work, but more in the commercial world at Milk Studios. And so I wanted to be a space holder in that way. And so then I did a training and pretty quickly realized that the training fell short in so many ways. And most doula trainings do. It's like, these are the very basic ways that you hold space for this woman, this family. And at a certain point, you kind of take your hands off. And I was like, I started noticing a lot of women were getting into situations where they couldn't advocate for themselves. And then the doula was not really assisting with advocating. And then the partner had no idea how to advocate. And so there was this huge deficit. And that's when I got into the education component and certified as a Bradley instructor, the Bradley method, and started teaching everything about unmedicated birth, which led me down the path of exposing the medical
Yeah.
industrial complex.
Yeah, when you start researching natural birth, obviously inherent to that research is going to be, well, what's the other way people have begun to do it?
Right.
And it's kind of treacherous. I've done a couple shows on it. I've had Yolanda Norris Clark on, and who was super solid. And I didn't find her perspective to be controversial because we're just talking about like the way humans have been having babies for a very long time.
Right.
But I had another guest, Janice Barcelo,
Yeah.
and she, I mean, I vibed with her, but she was very controversial because her perspective on medical birth is tied to her perspective that it's essentially a satanic ritual.
Yeah.
And I think that was, I don't know, I didn't get everyone's feedback, but I know for some that could be a little difficult to contextualize. But based on the things she shared with me, I don't know that I could couch it any other way.
Yeah.
You know, I remember doing the intro for that and I was like, hey, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If some of her perspective is, you know, that leans into that realm is off-putting to you, like just leave that alone. And she's stating medical facts about things like the
Right.
dangers of ultrasound and all kinds of practices, circumcision, all kinds of things that I
Right.
think any rational person could look at objectively and say, yeah, there's a better way to do it.
Of course.
I noticed a lot of funny things.
Me too.
One of them is when I look at your Instagram, and there's all your beautiful, beautiful photography, by the way,
Thanks.
of birthing taking place. I find myself a little squeamish,
Hmm.
like, and this is in not even hospital births, but just you know in the kiddie pool, you know, however we're doing this, right?
Yeah.
And I look at that and I think, why am I squeamish about that? And it's almost the same kind of reaction I have to like hunting animals, right? And like
Oh.
gutting an animal, like just any kind of blood and guts, or seeing bodily fluids and the insides of things and parts that you don't normally see, and
Right.
all of that. And it kind of brings me to this realization of how, and I'm sure that many people share this reaction with me, but how disconnected we are from not only the process of birth, but also of death.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like it's all hidden away behind closed doors in the funeral home, in the hospital. And, you know, like, why would I get like squeamish looking at a baby coming out of a woman's body and all of the blood and fluids and things like that? Like, why would that look kind of ew to me? It's just, it makes me just realize there's something wrong with me. Like, I got to fix this. When you started photographing birth, did you have any kind of visceral reaction like that? Or did it just all feel, you know, normal and natural? And
So I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with anyone. I would say that there's an opportunity, right? Um, because we have all been programmed through Hollywood, right? So the woman's pregnant, there's like a very minimal birth scene, and then she's home with the baby, and it's like cleaned up. So there are a lot of missing pieces of this process that were programmed with from the beginning of time, you know, watching films, being told stories. Children, older siblings aren't invited into birth, so they never really learn. And so it makes a lot of sense. And of course, like you said, death is tucked away. Nobody talks about the defecation that happens right before the moment of death, or these lucid moments, and urination and vomit and the release of bodily fluids. No one, you know, that's not depicted in film. You know, it's like so
right, even when you think about like an action movie and somebody gets shot, like you don't see them shitting their pants. You know
no.
what I mean? I mean, even if it's
Or foaming at the mouth, you
right,
know, all
right.
the things that do happen, or even just bleeding through the nose, and you know, just the different, you know, yeah, urination,
So
all of those things.
when you started being present for births and shooting it, did you have to take some deep breaths and kind of acclimate yourself to it, or did it come naturally just in terms of the experience itself?
It came naturally, and I had been doing photography work for some time before birth photography that was very much about the body and um, these biological functions, like so more anatomical photography. So I had already been exposed to that, and it all made sense to me. It all makes so much sense. And feces, urination, vomit, birth, menstruation. If I were to see someone's arm break, I would probably pass out and vomit because that is not something that the body is supposed to do. So my nervous system can't handle it. But I could watch birth all day, because it's something that the body is meant to do. So there is no disconnect for me there, or from my animal body, there is no disconnect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. And how does having a doula, working with a doula, generally affect the outcome of birth?
Generally, I would say that, some of the statistics out there that 61% of women who hire a doula have an unmedicated birth, or their chances are much higher. They feel, a large percentage of women feel that their birth was positive if they had a doula. A lot of women say that if they have a doula postpartum, they're more likely to breastfeed, that maybe with the second one they had a doula and they didn't with the first one, and they were able to breastfeed the second one because of the support they had. Just like the few visits they had of someone coming to their home and holding space gave them the courage, the opportunity to breastfeed. So yeah, I would say that it can really impact the outcome based on what you want, right? If you set a goal with her, the doula or him,
Are
then
there male doulas?
there's one in Puerto Rico
Oh, really?
I've heard of. So I included him just now. But yeah, it can impact, have an impact in that way. What I'm finding is that there are a lot of doulas out there that tend to support the industrial like the medical industrial complex. Like they actually, because they have very little birth education and very little education surrounding the physiological process, and legal matters and rights, human rights, they actually fall short in the advocacy that I think is what women are looking for and why they actually hire a doula.
So you mentioned that you were trained in the Bradley method and that you're now teaching others in this method?
Yeah, so I taught the Bradley method for 6 years, and then I started my own method called Uncovering
Oh,
Birth.
really?
Yeah, which is so much based in Bradley. Of course, I love this method. It's traditionally called husband coach childbirth, but it's really partnered coach childbirth. It teaches the partner to be your doula, to create that masculine container.
Oh, wow.
And
Sounds
it's
like I need to take this training.
yeah, I would love it. And it is all about, so the Bradley is all about unmedicated birth. So it's like all the facts on fentanyl, all the facts on lidocaine, and how it affects the mother, how it affects the baby. It's very much like a crash course in obstetrics, if you want to look at it that way. And so what I've added in my method and what I've shifted is really more focus on the placenta. I've brought in the conversation of vaccines and really focusing on informed consent, not only throughout the pregnancy, but then postpartum, because it's like everyone hyper focuses on the birth. And then there's just this gap when it comes to those first few weeks, you know,
Yeah.
and what the container looks like and how it shifts for the woman and her partner those first few weeks.
So this is one method. What are some of the other kind of types of doulas? Are there other categories or other trainings that are prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, the most popular one in the US is DONA, Doulas of North America. It's an international organization, but it's like a 3-day training. And you just basically learn like how to do an intake with a client, where you're bound, how to draw boundaries, like what your scope of practice is, and, how to communicate properly with the staff, the medical staff, and then like, how to bill your client. So, that doula training, like I did it and then I was like, this is like useless. And then I just started pulling, apprenticing midwives. So just like working more in the field. I trained with Dr. Bradley. And then through my education and just being at births all the time was how I started to shift what I offer. So, my contracts, for example, with my clients are very specific. And they're like, I don't do what a doula would normally do. I get much more involved in this way. Like, you have to commit to an education for birth or else we can't work together. We need to speak the same language. I get very much involved in their life and their journey. And then some doulas are, pretty hands off. So it depends, and
Hmm.
there's somebody for everyone out there.
In an ideal scenario with you working with a client, at what point pre or post pregnancy would you kind of onboard with that family and start to work with them?
Whenever they find me. So whenever they find me, it's perfect for them. Sometimes it's like 8 weeks pregnant, they're ready to create that container, and sometimes it's right before the birth. They realize that this is what they need, and we make it work. And then we do a lot more postpartum, you know. So
So you're there supporting the mother and helping to educate them about breastfeeding and different
yeah,
ways to care for their newborn, et cetera.
yeah, I'm a lactation counselor as well, and that's really where my passion is
Really?
yeah.
Tell me about lactation.
Oh my God.
I saw
Uh,
something on your Instagram about like night nurses ruin
Milk
your
supply.
milk supply. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you forgive me, like not only am I just like a dude, but I've not had a baby yet,
Yeah.
so I'm fairly ignorant around some of this stuff.
Sure. So there's this thing that a lot of women feel that they have to do, and it's usually because someone told them that they need to do it, and it's hire a night nurse, which is a person that comes and lives in your home and maybe a guest room or something, and at night they'll manage the baby so that the mother's not waking up at night, so she can get rest, and then re-meet her baby in the morning. So maybe from like 8 a.m. to like 7 a.m. Sorry, 8 p.m. to like 7 a.m. The baby's with the night nurse. Or sometimes the night nurse will come in periodically to wake up the mother so that she can breastfeed and then take the baby away again to the other room so that the mother can rest. However, there is this initiation process that happens, right? Biologically, psychospiritually, between the mother and the baby, where they need to meet each other. And this rite of passage that happens for the woman, where she learns her baby's vocabulary, her baby's cues, body language, their very specific needs, and how they communicate. And when we, take that away for all those hours in the night, we start to create this codependence with this other person in that field, right? And in that constellation of that family. And I've seen some of my clients after the night nurse leaves, like month 3, the woman feels very confused and disoriented in the nighttime. Like she doesn't have that language and that ability to, and the confidence to care for the baby in the same way. So it creates this codependence and the lack of contact with the mother, or with the baby and the mother, that will decrease her milk supply. The body is intelligent. It says the more contact I have with this infant, the more milk I need to produce. The less contact I have, the less milk I'm producing. So the body is just taking cues from the mother and the contact. So that's why I really don't promote strollers. I promote only baby wearing, and this is all really for her health and for her milk supply so that she has minimal obstacles when it comes to breastfeeding. Like we already have society as a whole, the frameworks, what we can control in our home. I really want to give them all those tools. Like, what are all the things that we can do so that you can just have all the milk you need, your baby has all the milk you need, and you're unobstructed?
That's so interesting because when I've thought about the prospect of having a baby, I'm immediately because I really need my sleep. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone likes to sleep, but I just truly am a train wreck when I don't get sleep. And so that was one of the biggest obstacles to the idea of having kids for me, actually, was just like, I don't know if I can handle not sleeping for an extended period. So I've always kind of had in my head, oh, we'll bring someone in to help and take the baby all night, so that we don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't think my wife shares that fear. She's good to go. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. But to that point, I always think of things evolutionarily for some reason. My mind just always goes back, well, how did we used to do it? And if you think about a hunter-gatherer tribe,
Yeah.
right, 50, 60 people going back, whatever, 15,000 years or so, and since the beginning of humans, probably, I I picture that a woman gives birth and that she's spending some intimate time with that baby throughout the days and nights, but that baby's also sort of getting passed around to other women in the tribe and
Yeah.
is bonding to multiple people.
Yeah.
Would that, if that's true, would that principle not apply to a night nurse or any other women or men even that happen to be in the inner circle of that family?
Yeah, I mean that's just like if there were a multi-generational household might support that, right? Which some countries, some cultures still have. Perhaps in India, where you have a few aunts, cousins, maybe a grandmother, so all living in one house. So that's how little girls learn about breastfeeding is by watching these women and their family and their household. And when they get to that, the information is passed down. But that stays within the nuclear family. And the mother is always the one to breastfeed. In the hunter-gatherer times, like there was communal breastfeeding. Typically, women were having children at the same time, or there was always someone else who was also breastfeeding, so that support could happen.
Oh, I see.
Um,
Right.
However, the societal framework was so different that a woman did not need to worry about like, oh, well, I have to like answer these emails and like do this and go back to work and I have these meetings and like I have Pilates class and I like, so they weren't, so it's just that I
Right.
mean,
I got to post on Instagram. Shit, I didn't post today.
and it's that duality that starts to raise the cortisol levels and the adrenaline and can also inhibit the milk production and that split that's created and this mourning, this deep mourning of an identity, once we're breastfeeding, once we're staying up at night, once we're not going to the thing that everyone else is going to, once the relationships have shifted, we start to go through this mourning process. And I don't know that the women in these other societies were experiencing that. So
That actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess the whole context of like a woman's life back then would have been totally different,
it was to serve her family and to serve the community. That was
Mhm.
what she was doing, you know, and through that serving herself and feeling the fulfillment. So now the way we access fulfillment is not through that, is not so much through serving the family or serving the community.
Right. Yeah, that's something I've looked at recently is how this warped, I don't know, it's like a warp in the fabric of our culture that if a woman elects to be a homemaker and have babies and stay home
Yeah.
and is like under the title of like housewife, that's somehow frowned upon or is demeaning or of lower value
Yeah.
in the hierarchy of our sort of social structure.
Right.
And the women that I know that are in that role in the community here where I live, I mean, I like have nothing but so much respect for them. I mean, the work that they're doing in that,
Yeah.
in birthing and raising their babies. I mean, I look at them and they're so devoted and so beautiful to observe them in that role that they've chosen for themselves.
Yeah.
And to demean that in any way is just super twisted,
Yeah.
you know.
And there's just this like belligerent feminist ideology that like doing that is somehow like Stockholm syndrome, that like we
Right.
you
Like you
know
couldn't have done it on your own volition,
yeah,
right?
like
Like,
you believe that this is like your full potential,
oh man,
you know
that's sad.
yeah, and some people might say no, we've gotten past that, but I don't really think we have.
Wow, that's interesting. Back to the breastfeeding. A friend of mine, Matt Blackburn, did a podcast recently on tongue-tied.
Mm-hmm.
And this one was on there talking about this is something I mean, I'd never heard of it, but I've never sought to breastfeed myself, obviously. But she was talking about how many babies are born tongue-tied, and there's something with the expansion of their mouth and their palate that makes breastfeeding super painful because the baby has a much harder time getting the milk out. Is that something that you're aware of?
Yeah, so you can have a lip tie or a tongue tie. So the
Oh,
frontal
okay.
lobe, here or here under the tongue could be really tight. And, when I look in babies' mouths, they typically look pretty tight, and over time, over the days and the weeks, it starts to expand. However, now most IBCLCs, lactation consultants, they'll look in the mouth and say, oh, you're having pain breastfeeding. This frontal lobe looks tight. Just go get a laser surgery for the baby and have it separated. No big deal, one and done or whatever. However, what I notice is that women just don't have the technique. Like their baby is not getting a deep enough latch, and so they're feeling the pain. Or the woman is supplementing with a pacifier or perhaps an artificial nipple with, a bottle, for example. And so the baby's latch just becomes naturally more narrow. So when it goes to breastfeed, it's painful for the woman. So the first thing I always ask when I get to their house, because I can only do in-home visits, I need to see where they're breastfeeding to know. It's holistic, I can't
Hmm.
just do it on
Hmm.
Zoom or something. Um, and I usually ask, are you using a pacifier? And they'll say, yeah. I'm like, let's take it away for 3 days, see what happens. And it usually shifts. So that frenulum, the tongue tie thing, I think it's over diagnosed. And often it's a technique thing and it's a lot of other factors, and an emotional energetic rejection of breastfeeding can affect the woman's like desire and pain threshold as well.
Right. I imagine it's something that one would have to really surrender into,
Of course.
right? Because it's just, you're living your best life. You're not used to that sort of activity. You get pregnant, you give birth, and then all of a sudden, like, you're now a milk machine. And
Totally.
it's got
24/7.
to be a huge change. I mean, just again, observing the new moms that I know
Yeah.
here. And I mean, I was at a gathering a couple days ago for a baby blessing, actually. And we're there 3 hours, and the baby had just turned one. My friend's Devana is her baby, and Albert, Devana Albert. Shout out to my homies there. And I mean, I wasn't paying that much attention, but there were numerous times that I looked up and she was breastfeeding her baby Nature in
Hmm.
in that short period of time,
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is a thing.
Yeah.
This is ongoing. It
Yeah.
isn't like when you feed your dogs, like twice a day I feed Cookie, in between a couple treats, but she's not coming to me continually, multiple times in a 3 hour span of like, hey, feed me.
Totally. It's breastfeeding on demand. And most of those feedings are not for the milk. They're for touchstone. They're for the baby to access a
Really?
touchstone, for them to regulate their nervous system, and for them to just bond with the baby. I mean, how many times do you reach over to your partner and you just want to like rub her hand?
Constantly.
You just want to hug her. You just want to look in her eyes. Sometimes you just want to kiss, right? That's what they do when they're breastfeeding. It's just a mode of connection and communication. And so, yeah, they breastfeed.
When you talked about the sort of the practice of it in some women, are they getting it like ergonomically wrong to make it
Sometimes,
painful?
yeah, sometimes they'll just kind of put the baby there, and so the baby just gets the end of the nipple, whereas the baby's mouth needs to open wide. The head should come back so that the jaw opens. The breast should be sandwiched, and it should really be put like the areola should really go deep into the mouth,
Oh, okay.
you know? And that's why women have so much pain or cracked nipples or it feels really sore. They every time the baby latches, they wince, and that's not normal. So most women give up because they're like, fuck this.
Yeah, I bet.
Oh my God, like I've never felt anything more painful, and I understand.
I'm I'm repeatedly reminded how blessed I am to be a guy in so many ways. Just like the things women, especially mothers, go through. I'm like, God bless my mom.
Oh
Wow.
my God, yeah,
Right. And
I
then you
know.
become like a little, in some cases, like mine, you make it through childhood and then you become a wild ass teenager.
Totally.
There's a whole other set of responsibilities that come with that. How important is skin to skin contact? You mentioned you're not into
Yeah.
strollers. You want the mother carrying the baby. A friend of mine in LA, I forget the name of the brand, but try to find it for the show notes. But he created this, kind of baby harness that is
Yeah.
skin on skin,
Cool.
right? There's
Yeah.
no fabric in between. How much of a difference does that make in the
I think that's great. I mean, what happens is the chemical skin imprinting, where the hormones are exchanged between the mother and the baby and the father. So I always like to say, the mother can breastfeed, do her thing, and then the father can take the baby in the carrier and go on a walk for 20 minutes. And that's the way that everyone gets that bonding. Partners really don't play a role in breastfeeding. Like, there is nothing for men to do when it comes to breastfeeding except create the container.
right?
Food, shelter, and safety is really all they're supposed to be providing when it comes to
Yeah. Go
breastfeeding.
get him, girl. Hang in there.
Exactly.
Let me know if
And
you need me.
and then and with that support and that ease and that surrender, she will be able to do what she needs to do, and it will become second nature, and she'll be able to walk and breastfeed in a few weeks. She'll be able to have the baby in the carrier and walk. You'll be able to go to wherever, out, walk around downtown and breastfeed while you're, and it's not a thing, So there has to be this initiation process, and it has to be supported so that she can get to that place of confidence and ease and be breastfeeding at 1 year old at a party like it's no thing,
Yeah.
you know?
Do women go through, because of our aversion and sort of puritanical relationship to nudity and body parts and things, do women typically go through difficulty in, the privacy of breastfeeding? Like in
Yeah.
my squad of people, I mean, there's just titties out everywhere. People are breastfeeding. You don't even give it a second glance. But
Yeah.
I imagine some women are more less comfortable with that.
Yeah, totally. And that really has to do a lot with the partner as well, like their comfort level, because there are some partners that, I mean, even in my classes, they'll be like, she can't like, because I'll say, if you're at lunch, don't go hide in your hot car to breastfeed, just like breastfeed where you need, like, make it what is going to be the easiest for you, and that's what you should do, and they're like, in public, So I think it has a lot to do with the partner as well. And if the woman does want to cover up or use something, she can, she should, whatever it is, but feeling that you need to hide to care for other people at a cafe or care for other people, caretake, that's we have to get away from that because then you're sacrificing your own comfort, your baby's well-being so that other people around you are not uncomfortable. So there's a little bit of like inner reflection that has to happen there.
How common is it for women to have difficulty producing adequate quantities of milk?
It depends on the type of birth they had.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like the level of trauma during the
Really?
birth.
Wow.
Whether or not they received medication can affect that as well. How long were they separated from the baby after the birth? If they're at a hospital, for example. And then are they co-sleeping or not co-sleeping, right? So if the baby is sleeping with you in the room after the birth, you're having more skin to skin contact, more chemical skin imprinting, your body is going to produce more. What's the woman's stress level? What's her relationship like with her partner? Is her cortisol, through the roof, or is it at a good level? That's going to affect her supply. Is she trying to lose too much weight after the birth too quickly, right? Some people kind of go back into that like paleo, like, whatever diets. People go
Yeah,
into their
yeah,
diets,
yeah.
and I believe there is a really specific diet that supports your milk supply. And so sometimes losing too much body fat will affect that. So there are so many factors, and it's tricky because so many things that seem like they're healthy and normal and part of how women just should be are really not congruent with what supports your milk supply and a healthy postpartum state of mind.
What are some of the dietary recommendations you have to ensure that there's plenty of milk?
High level of protein, animal protein, roughly 80 grams a day, and high fat, animal fat.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are there any, I remember I found out a few years ago that I was not breastfed and it was like very disappointing. I don't blame my mom. I mean, it was 1970 and
Yeah.
they told her you didn't have to just give them
Totally.
formula and
Totally.
that was easier and more comfortable for her. So, is what it is. But,
Totally.
um,
She was in
I,
alignment. She was in alignment.
I imagine back then, I turned out okay. Although sometimes I do wonder, I might have been a little smarter,
I think that too. When I think about what happened to me after my birth, I'm like, I had potential,
But I have looked, yeah, right. But I have looked into baby formula for friends. I did have one friend back in LA that just didn't produce any milk,
Uh-huh.
and so they're like, "Luke, what's the good formula?" And I did some research on it, and I was shocked to find that even a couple years ago, I mean, this was horrific stuff. It's like soybean oil and just
Yeah.
gnarly,
Yeah.
gnarly stuff. Um, are there any alternatives to natural breast milk that are viable at this point?
Well, this is one hierarchy that one could consider is obviously breast milk being at the top, feeding on demand, and then breast milk from a bottle, that's your own, and then donor breast milk from another woman, and then raw goat's milk. And then you could do homemade formulas like from Dr. Weston Price. That's a mixture of bone broth and raw goat's milk and a few other things. And then you could go into commercial grade formula. They make goat or sheep formulas that come from Germany and things like that that have very little additives.
Right. Not made with a bunch of GMO seed oils and
Oh
stuff.
my God, no, it's criminal.
Thank you for that hierarchy though. That's good. That's something good to put in the show notes.
Yeah,
And I'll just add for this conversation for parents that have already given birth and they hear some of the things we're going to get into, don't feel ashamed. I mean, we're all like figuring this out as we
totally,
go. And also if
totally.
anyone wants to do things differently, like go nuts. I'm just into exploring experts in the fields of the optimal human experience, being
Yeah,
as healthy and happy and fulfilled as is possible. But perfectionism, as I'm sure you've discovered in your work, perfectionism can also turn into a neurosis, right? Where now you're worse off than if you just lived your best life. I think I came to this with food some time ago, right? Like, you know, like boomeranging back from different diet
right.
fads and stuff, and eventually just like God, the neurosis of being so orthorexic or borderline orthorexic is probably worse for someone than just living your best life and doing the best you can.
Well, how can we know the framework? Like, how can we dance and play within the framework if we just never learn the framework? Like some of my clients will say, I feel guilty because, now my partner is taking the baby at night so I can get more sleep and it's not sleeping with me constantly. And I'm like, why is that bad? Like, well, because remember, one time we had a conversation, you said that like she should be with me all night. And I'm like, no, I told you that this would be optimal and that, but for your sleep is the best, like you need to sleep, right? But this would be optimal. And then within that framework, what works for you? And you can plan and you can decide before the birth how this is going to be. But once the baby's there and you meet them, you then know what you both need. But if I just tell you, like, yeah, put the baby in a crib in another room, it's all good, you're not even going to know what's possible beyond that. So I give you kind of like the full spectrum. And then within that, you make an informed choice that is aligned with your innermost desire and needs.
I like that. A
You know,
gradient.
it's a gradient,
Yeah.
but I have
Yeah.
to, I have to give the extremes so that a gradient can be explored. But if I just say like whatever feels right at the time, no one, what are the options of what could feel right at the time? Like you have to
Right.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing about I'm a huge EMF safety advocate,
Uh-huh.
and one of the worst things that takes place in babies' lives are baby monitors
Oh
that
my
are
God.
they produce so much Wi-Fi or so much radiation, so much RF, and people put their baby monitor. And again, no shame to the parents that do that, but hey, get an EMF meter and test that monitor. Now they make some wired ones and stuff, which I think I even have one of those on my site. But yeah, there's just so many things. Again, like take something like an EMF producing baby monitor. If that's the only thing you can do, right, it's maybe better than your baby jumping out of the crib or choking or whatever happens to babies when they're left alone.
Right.
But even just moving it across the room by 10 feet exponentially
Yeah.
lessens the amount of radiation that that kid's getting exposed to,
Well,
you
absolutely.
know?
Yeah, and so many women are breastfeeding or holding their babies or the baby's napping and their cell phones are there, the computers. I mean, there's so much around them. And that's also
Yeah.
why I say baby wear, or have your baby next to you when it naps or like, some people get blackout curtains for the nursery. They have a crib, they have the cameras, and there's babies like in a chamber. And I'm like, if you want this baby to integrate, it should, run the vacuum when it's sleeping, like let the dog bark, like do not desensitized, like let it be light when it sleeps, and that's how they start getting on a natural rhythm with you and sleep, and you don't have to sleep train them. If you just integrate them into your routine, then you'll get
Oh,
that
that's
you'll get
interesting.
that natural rhythm you're looking for rather than like having to hire a specialist to sleep train. How will the
People
be
do that?
oh yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah,
wow.
there's a whole market there. But and when these baby monitors, like if your baby's in your care in the sling with you or it's napping next to you while you're doing your things, you don't need to have those cameras. And if it sleeps with you, you don't need to have those cameras,
Right. You just have a camera on yourself in
You
that
just it's
point.
just you, and then your maternal instinct is getting fine-tuned every single moment and you become that. You can start to hear. I mean, this is wild. This has been the account of so many women, myself included, where I've been in another location, like geolocation for my child, and my milk will have like started to come down. I'll feel what's called the letdown. It's like this warm tingle that starts here, and then milk begins to release. And like my mom will text me and say, "Oh, it's like your daughter's crying for you." I've been at births, when I was still going to births very often and still breastfeeding. And she'd be like, should I drive over to the hospital and, you can breastfeed? And I'm like, yeah, bring her over. I would feel it. And
Interesting.
so other women talk about that too. And it's, yeah. So you have that built in like radar,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but,
Yeah.
but there's a whole industry that thinks we need to be dependent on these, apparatus.
I bet that radar is super strong too. Just think about the very common phenomenon of you think of your friend, ding, they text you, right? I mean, that's just,
Totally.
you're not even in someone's field remotely as close as you would be with your own offspring, as
Totally.
I mean, I imagine that being the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah.
The interconnectivity of,
Yeah.
you know, the ethers.
Yes,
So you have a kid?
I do.
You have one daughter?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Were you already a doula by the time you gave birth
I
to
was
her?
I was photographing births and I had just done my doula training. And
And
she was
did you have like a badass doula that assisted you with your birth?
yes, her father.
Oh, really?
He did
Wow.
the Bradley training. And so we didn't have a doula, like, we just had a midwife and him. So it was the three of us. And yeah, he was badass.
Wow.
He really rocked it. My
So cool.
labor started. So I was 9 days after my due date, and my midwife said, "All right, you got to start getting things going because state of Florida, if by day 10 you haven't gone into labor, like we have to transfer you to a hospital." And I was like, "No way." No way. So I did all the natural induction techniques I could think of and then finally started my own labor at home. And then, yeah, it was pretty slow. Friday night, I let him sleep, always let him sleep. Like you do your thing until you really absolutely need them because they're the best when they're well rested. So I let him sleep and
I can
then
attest to that.
totally. Yeah, I was like, I need him for game time. Right
Yeah,
now, I'm good.
yeah.
And so all through Saturday, we went out walking, we went swimming, we did all kinds of things, and I was contracting like every 10 minutes for most of the day. Yeah, and then Sunday afternoon, she was born
At home.
at home. Yeah.
And when you had your baby at home, and I guess like maybe you could kind of give us what your hierarchy in terms of the most optimal home setting would be in terms of like, is it in one of these little tubs in water or in a bed or
Oh no, it's
does it
wherever.
matter?
It doesn't matter. It
Okay.
doesn't matter. You just need running water. Um,
What do you need the running water for?
just washing things,
Oh, okay. Okay.
washing your hands if you need to.
I realize how clueless I am.
So that's the only thing the midwife will check. She'll do a home visit and be like, "Do you have running water? Okay, we're good. We can do the home birth here." Yeah, I mean, I had a tub and I was in it for a while. The warm water really takes the edge off of the contractions and the discomfort, and you become buoyant and you take pressure off the joints and you can move and float. But you hit a certain point at the end of first stage labor, once it starts to get really active and you're contracting every 4 minutes, the hormones start shifting, you're getting ready to transition, you're getting ready to go into the pushing phase of this process. And you start to go into deep surrender, or you should. And for me personally, and what I see with my clients and my students is that you want to start grounding and anchoring. And in the water, I was like, this is really not grounding, and we had a raised elevation in our home. And so there was space underneath the foundation anyway. So I just felt too high to really ground. So I started crawling around, much like a little dog or a cat would, and just trying to find where I felt the most secure and grounded. And it was like in my bed, burrowed with like 10,000 pillows and a down comforter and like darkness.
Oh, wow.
But I had this idea like I'll birth in the water and it'll be like those Russian films that that I've watched of women birthing in tide pools. And I was like, I got to get out of here. Like, this is
Interesting.
not, or I didn't feel safe.
And you mentioned pushing, and I've heard some kind of home birth advocates and I guess doulas essentially talk about you shouldn't have to push. Like that's a medical birth thing. Like you just,
Yeah.
what's the deal with
S- s-
assisting by, contracting and pushing versus relaxing and surrendering into the
So
allowance,
typically women are medicated on an epidural. 99% of women who birth in hospitals are on an epidural.
which is essentially a painkiller?
Yeah, so it's actually it numbs you from basically the belly button down. There's like a flexible needle called a Twahi needle that is threaded into the dural space of the spine, and they inject you on they're on a drip of lidocaine and fentanyl. And so women don't
That already does not sound like a good idea. I'm sorry. Like,
yeah, I know.
okay, go on, go on.
Um, and so the woman doesn't, some women say like, I could still feel enough. I had a very low drip. I still knew when it was time to push, but for the most part, women don't. That's if the epidural works properly. Some women only get numb in one side and they can still feel the other side. And some epidurals don't work for certain women. And, so if it's working as it should, the woman is not supposed to feel anything, and she is instructed on when to push because she doesn't know when to.
Oh, I see.
And so now it's just kind of the protocol, and it's just the way things are done. Like, all right, and that's what we see in films, like go, 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 push, and with an unmedicated birth, you start to feel this sensation after you go through transition. Transition is a very short shifting of gears of the control center. All the hormones shift, and the woman starts to feel expulsive contractions, similar to a bowel movement. There's a lot of pressure on the rectum from the baby's head because the baby's low. So she'll start her breathing will change, right? Instead of doing this long rhythmic, more yogic breathing, she goes into this bearing down. Much like, next time you're on the toilet, just notice your breathing. That's really the same. So she'll start to bear down, she'll start to hold her breath, And she'll start to say, like, I feel pressure. Like, I just, midwife will just say, okay, release, just follow your breath, whatever you need to do. And so the woman will naturally feel into that and guide her, guide her baby out in whatever way she needs to. Yeah, so this idea of coached pushing, some of my clients say, like, if I'm struggling, if you see me struggling, if I'm not doing it right, just tell me what to do. And we're like, okay, we will. And then they're fine. They don't need, they don't need much.
And what about the position of a woman giving birth? I've also heard something about, um, that it's unnatural for a woman to be on her back with her legs spread, that's kind of come out of the industrial medical complex, but that women in nature, a natural woman is going to squat or be on her hands and knees. There's other ways.
Yeah, I like to teach about all the possible positions, like learn them all, imagine yourself in all of them, and then kind of throw it out and follow your body in labor. And that's it. And be in a setting, in an environment, because you asked about environments, like just be in an environment where you have the freedom to go into any type of position you want to go into. And if you have a birth attendant, right, if it's a midwife, she might say, try this, like your baby's posterior, meaning your baby's facing this way, what we call sunny side up. So it might be good for you to try hands and knees. So sometimes we'll make suggestions if we know certain things that are anatomically, specific for that woman. However, yeah, lying on your back is from the knock 'em out, drag 'em out era. Knock the mother out, drag the baby out, where it was just, she's typically on nitrous, she's on her back, and the doctor, the OB can, give her an episiotomy, get the forceps in, take the baby out, and, do what they need to do. So that's just how we're used to doing things in the hospital. That position of lying on the back, it's called McRoberts, and that can be really helpful if the baby's head is caught on the pubic bone. And so to help the baby drop down and out, we'll put the woman on her back. Sometimes we'll put something really hard and flat under her back to really assist. And it's so uncomfortable for her, but we'll kind of unhook the pubic bone, and then she can go into her squat and do her thing, whatever she
Oh,
needs to do.
interesting.
So,
And how do you determine what position the baby's in? That's something I always find fascinating. It's like, oh, we had to do this or that because the baby was upside down, or, something was wrong just in the way that they were situated in the birth canal.
yeah, so you can feel from the outside through palpating. You can observe the woman. What position is she spending most of her labor in? Like, is she mostly on hands and knees because everything else doesn't feel good? That baby might be posterior. If she wants, the midwife can do a vaginal exam just to feel the baby's head and see, like,
Oh, really?
where things
They
are
can go in there
positioned.
and just be like, hey.
Yeah, in a hospital, they'll do them like every 45 minutes just to, like, see how much a woman is dilated, which is not necessary. However, in a home birth setting or a birth center or whatever it is, the midwife can say, hey, you've been pushing for a while. We're not making too much progress. Would you like me to check and see? Maybe the cervix is still kind of on the baby's head, what we call a cervical lip. So the midwife might feel in there, say, oh yeah, there is a cervical lip, meaning that one side of the cervix is all the way down and there's still a little stuck here. So then we'll have the woman bring up her left leg, and try pushing with her left leg to see if she can get that lip up. And so, it can be really collaborative and not forced or invasive. So that's one of the, that's one of the beautiful things about having a midwife that you love and trust and, to guide you, to hold space for you. And of course you can do free birth without an attendant, and that's a whole other world. Um,
So, the different options would be just full normalized Western medical birth,
yeah.
right? Then I'm just going to run through this and tell me where I don't have it right. Then there would be a hospital birth where perhaps you have a midwife and or a doula present at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Then there would be a home birth where you have either or both a midwife and a doula.
Mm-hmm.
When we're defining free birth or wild birth, is that where it's just the woman and her partner and whoever else she feels like having there, but there
Mm-hmm.
isn't a quote unquote professional
Right.
birthing assistant there?
Yeah.
Do I have that
Yeah.
framework
And there
right?
are some women who are birth keepers where they've done different types of trainings to assist with the process, but they don't consider themselves to be medical providers. And so that might be someone who's at a free birth, or a woman might just be like, I'm here with my partner alone, or I'm alone and my body's just going to do what my body does.
Wow.
You know?
Oh my God. it shows me how indoctrinated we are because even being a man, when I think about like a wild birth, I immediately go like, it's going to go wrong. You know, the
Right.
woman's going to die. Like it can't go this way. And thinking about just animals and humans kind of in the wild. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, things I guess did and do go wrong,
Yeah. In any setting.
right? But we've also been doing that for freaking ever,
Since the beginning.
right? And just I don't know. I was watching a video a couple weeks ago of I think it was yeah, it was an elephant giving birth,
Yeah.
and it was so interesting. I think they were I don't know if they were all females, maybe they were, but they kind of like encircled the pregnant
Hmm.
elephant, and then boom, the elephant just comes out, hits the ground,
Yeah.
and they all just kind of stay in this protective circle, and then after 1 or 2 minutes, the baby elephant gets up and just starts cruising.
Yeah. They all start trumpeting too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember that part, but I just thought, wow, that's so fascinating. Like they just make it look so easy, and you think, oh no, it's gonna get hurt when it hits the ground, or they're gonna accidentally stomp it, or
So all
it's
of these
just
mammals, when they're born, they're at that stage where they could walk or, and they'll breastfeed for a few months, sometimes depending, a few weeks to like cats, it's like 6 weeks. Gorillas, it's like 5 years. So they're all at different stages, but they can walk and kind of fend for themselves spatially, whereas a human infant is not at that stage until it's around 9 months old.
okay.
Hmm.
So you can't just drop your baby on the ground and
No,
let it go.
I wouldn't recommend it, but it's okay if it happens.
And what's the general difference between a doula and a midwife for people listening that
Oh,
aren't that
yeah.
familiar with some of the terminology?
Yeah, the training's totally different. I mean, a midwife is a medical professional that can offer prenatal support. They attend the birth. They can offer different types of medical support like pitocin or antibiotics.
Can they do that at a home birth as
Mhm,
well, like a licensed midwife?
mhm.
Oh, okay.
They can, each state is so different. Some states don't allow midwives to even carry Pitocin. It's just, they make it really difficult. But Pitocin can be helpful in postpartum hemorrhage. So why not give that to a midwife? But that's a whole other conversation.
What is postpartum hemorrhage?
Just when the mother will continue to bleed at the wound site where the placenta detached, and the placenta and the uterus is not contracting back as quickly, and the wound site is still very open, she may continue to lose some more blood. And so traditionally, a woman would just take a piece of the placenta and swallow it to contract the uterus.
Really?
Yeah. But now we
Is that
have
because the placenta has some magical cocktail of
it has some
hormones in there?
magical cocktail and it'll
Wow.
it'll stop the bleeding. Or
What?
take a piece of the umbilical cord, swallow it, or keep it in the mouth.
Really?
Yeah, there's a great book called The Placenta, the Hidden Chakra, and it talks all about these traditional practices. However, in the modern world, we have Pitocin, which typically is what a woman, a midwife might inject into your leg if she notices there's an excessive amount of bleeding happening, and usually does the trick. So yeah, a doula is not a medical professional. I mean, doulas do not treat, diagnose anything. They should not be doing vaginal exams. They should not be taking blood pressure or saying your baby's breech, your baby, like they shouldn't do any of that. That's not within the scope of practice. I mean, they can, but they have to have a good contract to make
Right.
sure that
Right.
there's no liability there,
Okay.
But that's really not the training that doulas get.
Got it. Okay. And you mentioned Pitocin, and I
Yeah,
remember when I interviewed Janice Barcelo, I mean, that was like a hardcore interview. I
far
mean, the
out.
stuff she was sharing was like,
I
it was,
listened to it.
you did? It
Yeah.
was terrifying. I mean, I'm just like, oh my God. So then I had to work through this whole thing of rather than focusing my energy on being afraid of having a medical birth, of just leaning into the prospect and the vision of having a beautifully uncomplicated home birth when
Yeah.
the time comes. But when
Yeah.
she talked about Pitocin, if I remember correctly, she was very anti-Pitocin because of its tendency to interrupt the bonding between
Hmm.
a mother and the newborn
Yeah.
because it essentially shunts the oxytocin,
Right.
response and relationship between them. Do you know anything about some of the
Yeah.
downside of Pitocin? Would you agree with that, or do I have
Yeah.
that right?
So that everyone knows, Pitocin is a synthetic form of oxytocin, which we naturally produce, which is what we call the love hormone. It's released during orgasm. It's released when we kiss. It's released when we hug for longer than 10 seconds. It's released at birth and when we breastfeed. And so when we're given Pitocin in the labor process, then the body's like, oh, I don't got to produce my own oxytocin. So it does interrupt a very natural, essential process for the mother's labor to unfold. And then, of course, I've noticed this, that most women who receive pitocin to maybe induce their labor or to give their contractions more oomph end up having postpartum hemorrhage after the
Oh,
birth,
interesting.
and then more pitocin is given to them.
As such is the pharmaceutical industrial
Yeah,
complex, right? It's
yeah,
like create a problem and you have a solution for it. It's usually not the same thing though. That's interesting, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
Wow. And then what about what's your perspective on ultrasounds? It seems like women are very attached to this practice, and being an EMF guy,
Yeah.
ultrasounds don't seem like a good idea at all. I mean, it's basically like a little radar dish that you're putting on your abdomen, and it creates sound, right?
Right.
That is extremely loud to that little growing baby.
Yeah, yeah. And people always say, "Oh, the baby's being difficult. It turns away every time we get close." Like I've heard people say that she's a diva. She turns away whenever we get the probe near her. And I'm like, it's because it sounds like cats and nails on a chalkboard. That's what they're experiencing. Jim West has a great compilation of studies that were done in China, ultrasound studies done on humans. We don't have them here in the States. And so I really recommend people look into that. The,
Oh,
the
cool.
only studies,
We'll put that in the show notes.
yeah, for sure. The studies we have here are done on lesser mammals and mice and things like that. But what
Oh,
we
okay.
found is that when the pregnant mice are exposed to ultrasound wave technology, that the fetuses, their brains don't form in the same way. And what ends up happening are a variety of cephalic disorders and cognitive dysfunction. And, some people will say, well, my child was never vaccinated and I did all the right things and I ate all the right things and I took all the stuff and I had the home birth and still really high on the spectrum of autism. And so Jim West alludes to ultrasound really being the main culprit for this epidemic.
Interesting. Wow, I didn't even know that part.
Yeah.
Huh. And what would be some of the risks or potential risks of not ever doing one ultrasound and just
So you
kind of
asked
winging
about
it?
this attachment to this process,
Hmm.
and when we become pregnant, we're just so conditioned, unfortunately, to believe that now there's something pathological going on, and that we have to make sure everything's okay. Like, is the baby okay? Am I okay? Get the blood work, go see a doc. I have to go see a doctor, right? Like that's who's gonna tell me what's up. And then when you go to get that ultrasound, they'll just schedule you for more, and they'll say, oh, did you know your uterus is tilted this way or that way? Oh, you have a history of fibroids. We're going to need to do more ultrasounds and really keep an eye on this. So now you're in this field that like something could potentially go wrong. And it feels responsible to constantly look at the baby throughout the pregnancy to make sure that everything is okay. And I've had clients in the past, an ultrasound is done and then they find something and they're like, we're monitoring it. And then the baby's born and that thing is not there. So what has happened is that there's just been this field of anxiety created, right, throughout the pregnancy, which affected the mother, the baby, the entire family constellation is now affected by this anxiety around this potential issue that ended up not even existing. So ultrasound can create an issue when there is no issue. And also, I always ask people, like, if you find something in that ultrasound, you have to really ask yourself, like, would you terminate the pregnancy over that information?
Oh, shit.
And if not, then why would you do it?
Right,
Because
right.
there are risks associated with ultrasound.
So if that ultrasound discovered a defect, for example,
Yeah, like
I
Down
mean,
syndrome.
okay, so they can determine that?
Hmm.
Okay. So so you're at whatever stage you're 4 months pregnant and you get an ultrasound and they're like, hey, we think your baby's going to have Down syndrome. Like you have to be prepared to be willing to get an abortion at that point, or else
Sure.
you're having the baby. So
Right.
like that's a really good question.
Yeah.
If there are risks associated with ultrasounds, what you're going to find out is that you're going to terminate that baby. If you're not,
Right.
then
Which, like it, some people say, well, I want to know because if that's the case, then I want to prepare, like maybe financially prepare
oh,
for
okay,
that, right?
okay,
Or
that's a little more
rearrange
humane, perhaps.
rearrange things. Or yeah, I wouldn't do that. We're not equipped for that. they're being honest with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's their choice, whatever it is. So this is just an invitation to ask yourself, what are your intentions behind doing this invasive procedure that has negative side effects for the fetus and for you potentially, like psychologically and emotionally, this could have really negative effects. So why are you doing it? And some people are like, I want to see the baby, this is how they connect with the baby. So there are other methods of connecting with the fetus, right? Through meditation, through conversation, through journaling. There are other ways you can connect with your fetus. It's not through exposing them to ultrasound wave
Right.
technology.
Right.
So just
Because
understanding your motives for
that's
these invasive procedures is really what this is about.
that's interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking about Allison, like, she's a shaman and she's tuning into these other worlds all the time. That happened this morning, and I was like, oh wow, I have to take plant medicine, I think at least so far to go to those places, and then yeah, I'm there. But thinking about her specifically, I mean, I feel like if she was pregnant, she would be totally tuned in to this baby inside her and
Yeah.
have this working, ongoing relationship with it, and probably not have to have something on a TV screen that's like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, this is available to all women.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, what about, I think it seems that a lot of women elect to have ultrasounds to find out the sex. Is that
Hmm.
the
You
gender?
could do that through blood work too.
You
Depends
can?
on your flavor of invasion.
Got it. Got it. Well, I think this topic in general, the pitocin, the epidural, like all of these kind of touch points of a medicalized birth, and I maybe just because I've covered it in other shows, just zooming out, I think many of us are just largely indoctrinated into perceiving pregnancy as an illness itself,
Right.
right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, if you think about it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you think about it, a woman that whose body is able to get pregnant is probably the healthiest it could possibly be, because if she wasn't, nature wouldn't let her get pregnant.
Right.
It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
to me, when I see a pregnant woman, I'm like, that's a healthy ass woman, like just
Totally.
vibrant and full of energy and hormones and just like just vibrating with life force.
Yeah. So radiant.
It's the opposite of being sick,
Right.
yet we think, oh, I'm pregnant. Okay, we got to book this appointments and start getting checked out and
Yeah.
ultrasounds and blood tests and start preparing for the worst. It's
Right.
kind of like
I know everything. I
we
mean,
have
everything
this.
is structured around this cash cow, which is a newly pregnant woman. And this is the segue. This is the gateway to pharma's entire track. It
Right.
starts at conception. So if the woman is locked in that way
It's
from the
two new
beginning,
customers, the mom and their
it's two new
baby, right?
customers.
Right.
Totally. Maybe three, depending on if you want to include the partner. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And how do you help? I guess if women are seeking you out, they're probably existing to some degree outside of that paradigm, but how do you help women or couples see that like they have everything they need, that creation or God has provided them with the tools and resources within themselves to procreate successfully?
It's a layered process. So it usually begins with dispelling fears around the pregnancy, the birth, even like early parenting for both the woman and her partner. So it's dispelling myths, and then it goes into how normal, natural, physiological birth works, right? And then it goes into understanding medications and understanding the system without vilifying it to the point that people shut down, right? There's a fine line because I get approached by the most conventionally oriented people to the most like out there in terms of alternative approaches. And both are right. There is no right and wrong. Both are right because it comes from their own personal choice. So, but it's this kind of delicate dance of making sure that it remains accessible and it is not an opinion. These things are very real and it's evidence based. So then once we go through that layer, then it's about having them join together and the masculine, whoever is holding the space for sometimes it's the woman's mother if she's birthing alone, if she's done IUI or IVF, and this is like her solo choice and her mother is her birth partner. Her mother will be the one, or her sister, her best friend, or her doula. That's the one holding the masculine space for her, or it's the husband, whatever it is. And then it goes into that polarity and understanding how that container is created and how do you want it to look and how much are you willing to protect her and how much are you willing to create a structure for her to surrender. So it's many, many layers of getting them to see that there are so many options, and it all comes down to whatever is in alignment with their deepest desires and their deepest needs around this rite of passage.
I think that's a really open-minded and healthy perspective as someone who's so I mean, I don't like to think of myself as anti anything, just pro what I want, you
Yeah,
know. I don't always successfully achieve that perspective, but I've been working through myself of just, like they say, worry is praying for what you don't want, right? And thinking about having a kid,
yeah,
it's like I'm just terrified of hospitals and doctors and like the whole thing. I don't want any part of it, but I find myself giving energy to that,
right.
like being against that. One could say from a metaphysical point of view that I'm more likely to manifest that experience
Totally.
by focusing on that instead of just like, cool, that's there. Let people that feel comfortable with that do that. We're just leaning into
Yeah. For
an
you,
experience that
knowing
is
this,
more ideal.
yeah, knowing this, like anyone who says, I don't want this or I do want this, I want them to be fully researched as to why they don't want it. Like there has to be conviction for a home birth or a hospital birth, whichever direction you're going. And once you understand and are very clear and united with your partner on why that is, then you just completely act like it does not exist and you just focus on this. But
Right.
like, so in my classes, we learn about all about hospital birth and all about home birth, and naturally people gravitate towards non-hospital birth, and I really don't focus on birth centers because I don't think that's a whole other conversation. It's like for me, it's either like home birth or hospital birth. But people naturally gravitate towards a home birth because of what they learn, and when they tap into their deepest desires and their needs, they see that every other decision about this process has been fear-based and a reaction, and going to the hospital is a reaction because they believe that that's where they're going to be the safest. And once they learn that that's actually where they're not the safest, where they're actually in the most danger, they refocus and
Well said. That's great.
yeah.
That's very cool. Um, well, while we're on that topic of the way that I would want to do it, so ultrasounds, um, pitocin, epidurals. What about like? I want to cover basically what I'm trying to stammer into here is what are some of the other invasive procedures that are commonplace in a medicalized birth?
Yeah.
I've heard about, clamping the umbilical cord or cutting it too soon and the baby's not done getting all the stem cells and all the goodies in there. Of course, C-sections, right? And the
Right.
inherent issues with that. Again, not to instill fear in people, but just perhaps to break us out of this mold that like that's the only safe way to do it. And you're saying actually statistically, scientifically, logically, it's perhaps the least safe
Yeah.
way to do it. What are some of the other things that we
So
want to be aware of with that route?
yeah, so just to be clear, an intervention is anything that does not look like a woman going into labor, birthing her baby, putting it to the breast, right? That's so as soon as you get a midwife, as soon as you get a doula, as soon as you get an OB, that's an intervention. As soon as you listen to the baby's heart tones, that's an intervention. So what I call the gateway drug is the IV. So when you check into a hospital, for example, you'll get hooked up to an IV of saline solution, dextrose, and this is supposed to keep you hydrated and your blood sugar regulated. And this is a practice from the knock 'em out, drag 'em out era, where women were not allowed to eat because they were on twilight. So if you're on, if you're under, undigested food could come up, you could aspirate, you could die. So now it's just like no one eats.
Oh, like when they have you fast for anesthesia.
Yeah.
For okay, got it.
Yeah. And so now women who,
I never knew because we're taking Cookie in for surgery tomorrow, and I was thinking, why do they do that? Now I
yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly. But, the likelihood of a woman going under general anesthesia at a birth is so unlike, it's just rare. It's very rare. So, I always encourage everyone to eat, right? You're in a marathon. Like you do not starve yourself. But the thing with the IV is that now your vein is accessible and it's easy access for anything else. oh, you're uncomfortable? Here, let me give you a hit of this, like just a little bit of that, a little bit of this. So that's the gateway drug is the IV. And what can happen is like hypovolema. Women can actually drown. You know, women are assimilating that fluid differently, every woman. So some women get edema, right? They get swelling of the legs like instantly, or the feet or the hands, and then they have to take blood pressure medication throughout the labor because now their blood pressure is going up from the edema. So that's a very invasive procedure, but it seems totally innocent and like responsible, right? Because you're hydrating. So that language is interesting, hydration. The other things that come up are that are invasive are monitoring the baby's heart tones, you know, listening to the baby obsessively to make sure that everything is okay. And sometimes that's intravaginally with this catheter and then an electrode that's actually screwed into the baby's scalp. It's called an internal fetal monitor.
What?
Yeah. So when they're not,
That's some Matrix shit. What the hell? God, humans are so weird.
it's super weird.
We're so weird. I just, okay, sorry, go on.
Yeah. So if they're not getting,
How are people cool with this though? Honestly, I'm just gonna like have a moment here. Like,
people just don't know. Like I've been a doula at births where the nurse comes in and she's like, "Honey, I'm not getting a good reading with the external monitor. So do you mind if I put an internal monitor in?" And she's like, the mom's like, "Sure." And I'm like, texting the husband like, meet me in the bathroom. We got to talk, you know, really quick. And I go in and I'm like showing him photos of what an internal fetal monitor is. And he's like, "What do you mean they're going to do that?" And I'm like, "Go out there now. Like, why are you guys not asking questions?" And this is why I have a rule now that you have to have taken a class before working with me, because I don't want to be doing that in the moment. And some doulas do that. They're like trying to wave magic wands in the moment with people who have no background on terminology, and it's difficult in a hospital
yeah,
setting.
I bet. Well, plus you have the pressure from you're walking into a system that is already in perpetual motion,
Oh,
right? And to
it's
like to
perfectly.
try and intervene when that's already like steam rolling ahead has got to be very difficult.
Well, yeah, I used to have to work so hard not to get kicked out of hospitals. So I was like texting, like like winking. It's like a whole thing because as soon
If I
as,
cough 3 times,
yeah,
kick
exactly. It's like knock twice or whatever. And so then he went in there and he's like, "We don't want to do the internal monitor." And she's like, "Why?" He's like, "It's dangerous. You're putting an electrode into my baby's scalp, my head, the head of the baby." And she's like, "We don't do anything here that's going to hurt you." And it's like, that language is the gaslighting is so crazy. And so they declined it in that moment. And he was like, "Do your job, listen to the baby's heart tones. If you need to use a stethoscope, old school, listen, like, but you're not putting that." So there are just so many procedures that are done, just kind of coolly. And I don't want to say slyly, but hey, to the woman, and no one asks questions. And then women find out later. I do birth trauma processing sessions with a lot of people who are like, "I found out later that they did XYZ, and like no one even asked me." And I'm like, "They did. They did. They said they were going to do it, and you just, you weren't listening, or you didn't have a conversation about it, or you just trusted them that they were holding space for you, which you should trust whoever's holding space for you in that birth setting." But, legally, I'm sure they told you, "We're going to do an internal monitor," and you're like, "Okay." And then you don't know what's going on. Usually, sometimes there's a drape. You don't even see what's happening, you know. So that's another invasive procedure. The vaginal exam's incredibly invasive. Doing them every hour, going in, feeling the baby's head, the cervix, checking dilation, the IVs, all of it. It's and then we go into newborn procedures. I don't know if that's something you
Yeah,
want
please,
to tap
please.
into. So yeah. So as soon as the baby's out, if what could be very invasive and damaging is using forceps or a vacuum to extract the baby. And this is often used when a woman can't push because she's on an
A
epidural.
vacuum?
Yeah, it's like a little cap, looks like a yarmulke with a tube. And yeah, they put it on the baby's head and they'll suction the baby out.
God. What the fuck? Oh my
It's like a
God. Okay, carry on.
sci-fi novel.
I just gotta breathe through this.
Um, and you know, oh man, I'm just going down the Rolodex of the shit I've seen. With the vacuums, but this is why
Aren't baby
vitamins
skulls super malleable and
super
soft? Like it
malleable.
doesn't seem like you would want to attach something to it and pull on it with
No,
suction. That seems like a
no.
bad idea.
And I experienced a fatality last year. My client's baby was died from the vacuum. So there's a dislocation that can happen of the baby's head, right?
Oh my God.
So yeah, it's very serious. So
God
that's why when
bless.
people are like, are epidurals really that bad? I'm like, the amount of things that can happen by wanting to check out for a few hours, it's not worth it. And you can do this, but anyway. So so the reason that vitamin K was designed, right, this blood coagulant was designed was because so many babies were having these violent births with forceps, C-sections, vacuums, and they would experience internal bleeding, and they would hemorrhage internally. So they had to get these vitamin K shots immediately after the birth to coagulate the blood from the, that's why,
That's how they started?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I always thought that was kind of cool. I'm like, yeah, bone density, awesome. You know, vitamin K2, love it.
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's
Oh
deceiving.
man.
It's a blood coagulant with a lot of additives in it that, have side effects. Like fetal gasping syndrome is one side effect of vitamin K, the vitamin K shot, which the baby's lungs will actually seize and it can asphyxiate.
Because of the coagulation.
Yeah,
Right. All those blood vessels in the lungs are like,
right, right,
gum up.
right.
Wow.
So, but that's why then it became commonplace. And it's so subjective, right? Like, what is a violent birth that could cause the baby to bleed internally? Let's just give all of them vitamin K, and we'll be done with it. So that's another procedure that gets done to the baby, usually right after the birth. Um, Erythromycin eye ointment, antibiotic eye ointment. If the mother's gonorrhea or chlamydia positive and the baby passes through the vaginal canal, it can pick up that bacteria and it can cause blindness in the baby's eyes. So all it takes is for that to happen to one woman and one baby at some point in history, and then all hospitals just start doing it, regardless of the woman's clean bill of health or whatever it is. They'll just automatically put it. So the thing in the hospital is they'll automatically do these things unless you decline, and typically at a home birth, they don't do anything unless you request it.
Got it.
So that type of freedom and ease really helps the woman drop into the experience, when she's in a home birth setting. So I just recommend that people learn about all of these things. Like, I mean, there are at least 12 invasive procedures that happen after the birth for the baby. Anything from aspirating the nasal passage to vitamin K to circumcision. And so we have to go through what is creating a birth plan. People are like, oh, birth plans, I showed it to my doctor and he laughed, or I took a birth plan and then nothing happened, and I'm like, well, did you really go in and learn, what everything was? The purpose of the birth plan is just to get on the same page as your partner. Ultimately, it's not because someone's standing there at the hospital at your home birth checking things off. It's because you two need to know what you want and what you're walking into and what the masculine's going to advocate for and how they're going to hold space and how they're going to protect and how they're going to be a gatekeeper. That's really the purpose of this plan. So that's why the education in pregnancy is so important for both of them.
Do you have like an online program or
I
something?
do,
You do?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna take it.
Yay, it's called Uncovering Birth.
And it's good for the male too?
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it's equally.
I find this stuff just so fascinating. I
Yeah,
think because for so much of my earlier life, just was kids were not a plan at all.
yeah,
A quite strong aversion, actually, to be
yeah,
honest. And so now I feel like, oh my God, I got all this catching up to do.
yeah.
What about the placenta you talked about, and also the umbilical cord post-birth? What's again, like we're talking about ideal natural scenario and all of the things that are perhaps lower on the scale of ideal. What do we
Sure.
do with both of those, and what are they?
So when the baby's born, usually anywhere from 3 to 30 minutes after the baby's born, the placenta will be born. So the placenta will come out and then it remains attached to the baby through the umbilical cord. And that placenta is still passing blood through the cord to the baby. So you want that to stay attached and you want the baby to get all that blood back, right? And what we see is that when babies get that cord clamped immediately, which was usually done in the knock 'em out, drag 'em out era, so that the baby could do that gasp reflex and start breathing. It would initiate their breathing to cut off their oxygen supply, right? Because they're getting all their oxygen through the cord. So when they clamp it, then the baby's like, oh shit, gotta breathe. Here we go.
Oh my God, that's brutal. That's got to be so traumatic for the
Yeah,
baby.
but you had to do that with medicated babies. And I say
Uh,
medicated babies because women are medicated. I mean,
right.
fentanyl gets to your baby. Everything in your epidural goes to your baby.
Wow. Yeah, it's not like there's like your liver's filtering it out before it gets to the
No,
placenta
no,
or the
no.
womb,
It's in the
right?
cerebral spinal fluid, so it
Oh
gets
my.
absorbed into the brain and then goes into the bloodstream. So everything in your
So your baby's
epidural,
born high on fentanyl.
totally.
Wow.
And then they're like, I don't want to breastfeed. I don't want to latch.
It's
I'm
probably
full.
impossible to correlate this, but I wonder if that has any influence on a person's propensity toward opiate addiction.
Yeah, there have been a lot of people who've
Really
hypothesized that and have looked into it. And
interesting.
yep,
Huh.
yeah.
Wow. Um,
So
in an ideal, everything's going great, home birth or wild birth. How is the placenta and umbilical cord dealt with?
yeah, so the baby's on the mom's chest, let's say, over the left breast where the baby can hear the heart. The placenta's in a glass bowl,
What
let's
does it
say.
what does it look like? Forgive me.
The placenta.
Yeah.
One side is the fetal side. It's the side that's been facing the baby, and it
Okay.
looks like this tree of life. And
Oh,
then the
okay.
other side, we call it the maternal side or the dirty Duncan because it's ugly, is the one that's been attached to the wall of the uterus. And so, yeah, it comes out, and it's usually a sixth of the size of the baby. So we see small ones, big ones. We see ones that are shaped like hearts. I've seen ones that like look like an amoeba. I've seen ones that are just perfectly circular. You know, they all look so different, and it's interesting how the mother's diet has actually, because I prepare placentas as well, and I do placenta training. So I teach people how to do this. You know, women who want to do it after their birth, and
Prepare them mean like turn it into a supplement?
yeah, turn it into a supplement. Freeze it for smoothie preparation. Postpartum, turn it into a broth.
Really?
Chop it up with
Oh my
onions. Eat
God.
it. Turn it
Are you
into a pate.
really?
Yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
this an ancient practice, like a
Yes.
forgotten practice
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was
So that book,
normal and
Placenta's a Forgotten Chakra, talks all about this. So if
oh,
people want
okay.
to learn more, it's a real, you could get through the book in 2 days.
Wow.
It's
We're
really,
all like taking goji berries, like, oh, it's a superfood. Like that sounds like a real
oh my
superfood.
God, I know. It's amazing. So yeah, the placenta's out. And, you know, it's beautiful. And I recommend leaving that attached as long as it feels comfortable for you, waiting at least until it stops pulsing and the baby gets all the blood back. And you can do what's called a half lotus birth, where you leave it attached for a few hours. And then when you feel energetically complete and you're ready for the baby to detach from what is its first mother, you decide how you're going to sever that bond. Is it going to be through cutting with metal scissors? Is it going to be through using a candle and butter, burning it and cauterizing the ends? What's that going to look like? And then what are you going to do with the placenta? Right? Are you going to consume it? Are you going to plant it in your garden with a new tree that's going to mark the growth of your baby? Like, what are the things that you would like to? Are you going to donate it to someone who is educating people on this? I mean, there's so many options.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
In a what do you call it? Knock them out, pull it out. What's the
Knock
thing?
them out, drag them out.
The knock them out, drag them out birth. What is the umbilical cord and the placenta just kind of discarded as refuse in a
Yeah,
biohazard bin and just
they say it goes
chuck
into
it?
a biohazard bin. They call it birth waste. I have seen them go into the bins. I've also seen them get put into containers and taken away somewhere.
Oh, to make placental matrix to get injected into my hip.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
they get sent to Biogen X. What's that company called in Maryland, where they produce stem cell therapy
Right.
medications
Right.
and
And I don't think there's
technologies.
anything wrong with that. I mean,
No, not at all.
if a woman elects to, yeah, here it's all yours. And I remember I interviewed this guy Matt Cook who did some surgery on me recently, and he was saying there are some pretty strict regulations in terms of like they can't just sell, like a woman can't monetize the placenta or the hospital can't. There's some sort of regulations
Yeah, so
in
they
that.
get donated to these companies for research and
Right.
stem cell therapy research, let's say. And then maybe that company like donates something to the hospital, like, oh,
Oh,
you need to like
okay. Okay.
redesign this new wing. It's need new beds, or I don't know.
Oh,
I
so
don't know how that indirect sale could
there's not
work.
a direct like monetary transaction perhaps, but there is a synergistic,
Yeah.
possibly covert relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But most women learn this, then they make different decisions.
Right.
And some say, that's great. I would love for it to go to a stem cell therapy company.
What's with the placenta in a home birth scenario again, like in everything's going great. What's the most common, like you said, you do preparations of the placenta. What's the most common practice that you find?
Dehydrating the placenta, pulverizing it, and encapsulating it.
Oh, okay.
In a raw method. So at 160 degrees for 4 hours, and then at 115 degrees, 112 degrees for about 15 hours.
Wow. So kind of like a desiccated liver or
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah,
A
yeah.
desiccated organ, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
That's the typical preparation for organ meat, and so that's how I've
Hmm.
applied it to the placenta. But what I've been encouraging people to do is to take it raw, part of it. So keep a piece of it, a portion of it raw, and then once that's over, you start taking the capsules. You can do tinctures with it, where you steep it in grain alcohol for 6 weeks, and you create like a mother tincture, like a homeopathic
Wow.
from it. I don't really
So
recommend cold
fascinating.
foods postpartum. You've just created all this space in the body, and there's a lot of wind. If you're looking at it through the Chinese model, Chinese medicine model and perspective. So I don't really recommend a lot of cold foods, more warming, grounding, nourishing foods. But I think for the sake of consuming it raw, if a smoothie is the only way you can do it, then, do that for a few days.
Wow. And what are some of the nutrients present in a placenta?
All of the pregnancy hormones that you were producing are in the placenta. So if you want to look at it as like a slow tapering off, because as soon as that baby's out, your body stops producing those hormones. And so now you're getting it kind of like on a slow drip after the birth, a lot of iron and stem cells.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So cool. This stuff is so fascinating to me. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Yeah.
Have you seen in post COVID, our lives have changed so much in so many
Wait,
bizarre
post, it's
ways.
over?
It is for me. It's been over since I think March 2020 for me, but society has changed. I've seen an increase in people like into home gardening and homesteading and prepping and
Hmm.
just general autonomy. Have you seen an increase in interest in doulas and alternative ways of having
Totally.
birth?
Yeah, totally. I mean, since the beginning of the pandemic, I started getting a lot of contact from people who were like the tagline was like, I'm contacting you because I would have never thought that I'd birth out of the hospital, but like I need to explore this now. Like, what do I do? You know? So it's always like, okay, let's take a class. Let's take a class, start here, educating yourself on this process. And yeah, and so people have really shifted toward an alternative approach to their experience. And mostly because they learned that, if the woman goes into labor, goes to the hospital, she does her rapid test, and she tests positive, then her partner can't come in, and then she's
Oh my
alone.
God.
So being alone in that moment will go against every conviction she has or previously had about COVID, and that's powerful. And
Wow.
that's really, that's disorienting for a lot of people. But hey, do you want to be alone during this process in the lion's den?
Damn, girl. Have you experienced any? You did mention that one baby didn't make it. Have you experienced similar traumatic situations where things went haywire in a home birth and everyone needed to rush to the hospital and rethink it?
No. I've been part of 4 transfers, meaning we transferred from home to the hospital, and they were all elective. And, one of them, the woman could not stop vomiting. Just the hormones were a lot. Everything she would drink and eat would come up. And so we put her on an IV at home because she was getting visibly dehydrated and her contractions started slowing down because she was getting so weak. And the IV did start to cause some swelling. So we were like, all right, got to get to the hospital.
When she's at home and needs an IV, would the midwife be
Hmm.
administering that?
Yeah, the
Oh,
midwife
okay.
will do the IV. There's a lot, she basically brings everything from, what you'd have at a birth center to the home. Her
Oh, okay.
oxygen, her antibiotics, all those things. Anything for suturing after the birth. If the mother's perineum tears, for example, she'll take care of all that. Um,
Are there, with the perineum tears, are there practices or things that a woman can do before or during birth that would make that less likely to occur?
yeah, resting in a squat. So rather than sitting in a chair like this, you're just always in a resting squat. You're
Oh,
adding elasticity to the perineum. You can do perineal massage, which I recommend the partner does, or you have someone do it. You can do it yourself. It's just like it's hard to really go to those edges that you need to go to on your own sometimes.
Yeah,
So,
I
it's
bet.
helpful if you have the assistance, and then consuming a lot of fats in your diet. Um, so yeah, but nothing's ever gone haywire at a home birth. However, I have heard of, certain situations where something unexpected happened, right? Like the water breaks and the cord comes out, the cord's hanging. It's still attached, everything's fine, but now you have a cord prolapse and you do have to get a C-section at that point. There's no way to like push the cord back up and
Oh, wow.
so that's not something that you can plan for, but these things of like suddenly everyone stopped breathing and we don't know what happened, like that kind of stuff doesn't happen at a home birth. Typically a baby's heart tones will go through the roof in either direction, up or down, depending on what drugs the mother has received. That's typically the biggest culprit for these emergency C-sections of babies having distress with their breathing is a mother who's been medicated.
From what I hear, it seems like in the medical model of birth that C-sections are just like totally normalized, and I've heard people say that, for a doctor delivering a baby, like they don't want to sit there throughout a long labor. So they're going to just pull the plug and
Yeah.
recommend or just go ahead and do a C-section when it might not actually be medically necessary because they just want to get home and eat dinner,
Yeah,
basically.
totally. I mean, the training for OBs is so different because they learn on women who are typically on epidurals already. So they don't actually ever get the opportunity to learn about natural birth and how labor unfolds and to read a woman's behavioral signs and emotional signposts and to look at the animal body in labor. They don't get that opportunity. So they really are not trained in natural birth. They're surgeons and they are trained to find red flags, whether they're real or made up, and act accordingly. And midwives learn on unmedicated women. So they really understand that it is such a wide range, but they learn how to read the emotional signposts, behavioral signposts, physical signposts. Like myself, for example, like I don't need to ever do a vaginal exam to know where a woman is at in labor. Like behaviorally, she tells me everything by what she says, her eye contact, the way her body's moving. I can see, okay, she's probably 7 centimeters dilated at this point.
Really?
Yeah. So that's something that we learn in the class, and that's something that I like to teach partners. I'm like, you don't need to be like, who do we call? Call the doula. Call the like. You're just like, oh, I'm watching her. Okay, we're good. Like she's doing this now. I give you charts if you want. If you're like, some people really like to be like, all right, we're here now. We're here now. I'm kind of watching this, and it's all about observing the woman. She'll tell you everything if you let her. Um, and so, yeah, OBs really don't have that opportunity to learn. And so I've seen OBs resort to C-sections when they could have just had some more patience. And also, they don't know how to resolve a lot of these, not complications, but maybe minor complications where maybe the baby's shoulder is stuck on the mother's pubic bone. It's called shoulder dystocia. And I've seen OBs just say like, oh, C-section, like, oh, get her into the OR. We got to, this baby's not coming out. It's stuck, And then I've seen midwives like, she's like, all right, all hands on deck. You grab her, flip her over. And like, I'm turning the woman one way while the midwife is corkscrewing the baby the other way, like opening a bottle, and then
Wow.
we get the baby out. So, that type of training is just so different. So I feel much more confident personally being in the hands of a woman who has this knowledge
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
body.
I think it's important too because I just get so pissed at the medical system about so many things, but it's like, it's a systemic kind of problem, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's not that every OB is disconnected or doesn't care or,
Yeah.
people within the system. It's like a hierarchical system in a pyramid,
Oh,
right? Where
yeah.
it's like the practices are sort of developed at the top and then trickle down and become normalized, however bizarre they seem to someone like me. But your average person who's participating in a birth wants it to go as well as possible,
Yeah.
right? It's
Totally.
not like everyone in there are part of a satanic cult that, want to torture this poor woman and her newborn. It's
Yeah.
just kind of like the system and everyone goes along with it.
I mean, they have no idea that they were trained within the framework of that cult, but they were, and their intentions are typically good. They want so within their framework, they're doing the best they can with the tools that they have, and that is not typically congruent with what is actually true and safe and in a frequency of love for the woman. You know.
It's interesting that I don't hear, and maybe I'm not listening to the right people, but you hear from a feminist perspective that we live in this patriarchy and so many things that are wrong with our society are at the hands of toxic masculinity or just men being in control for so many centuries. I don't see as much vitriol for the male dominated medical system as I would like to, right? It's like they're
I don't think men should be assisting with birth
okay. Oh, tell us about
at
that.
all. At
But
all.
I'm like, as we're having this conversation, I'm like, so much of a woman's power seems to be just in her discernment and ability to make decisions for her family and her body. Like all of that power through the medical side of it is just being siphoned away from her. And
Yeah.
she's just like kind of a victim and treated as someone who's ill when that's actually the most powerful time of her life.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I I think it's so bizarre that a man would want to be a gynecologist, like, or
I
an
do too.
or an OB, like,
That
and
would be so awkward. I'm
it's
like,
so. So I went to a male OB in high school once, and I was like, I am just like I'm traumatized. Like it was totally clinical and sterile, and like I've not been to an OB since, and that was like I don't know, 20 years ago. I mean a gynecologist since, but I've heard them say to women, this is going to hurt a lot. Like, why do you want to do this? And I'm like, how could they possibly know? Like, how does that make any sense? They have not experienced this, and they're not space holders for this. They're not equipped to do that. They don't offer you the love and the support and this containment. And when I look at certain dynamics, like certain couples, I see the partner, the masculine, standing by and watching his woman like just get completely abused by not only nurses but this typically male OB. And that's not only creating this inner turmoil for him, where it's like he couldn't protect his family, he was powerless, right? And now there's been this like desecration, and then the woman is like, not in the moment, but later they've, revealed to me like he just let this happen to me. Like my man was not there, or like my partner was not there for me, and that creates a lot of turmoil in their relationship. Um, and so yeah, it's really, oh man, it's so disempowering. It is so disempowering. And I don't really find it to be any different with female OBs, to be honest. And a lot of the female OBs I've worked with, they don't even have their own kids. And I also think that like that's something that I know people feel very differently about this, but I do believe that when you're doing this work, there has to be that shared experience um, that can really assist you in holding space for the woman.
absolutely. I mean, I think about if someone was to venture into a plant medicine ceremony
Yeah.
and the person facilitating had never taken the medicine, you would never like that
Oh
would
man,
you
that's a
would
great way to put it.
you'd never do that,
Yeah.
right? Like I want someone, how many times have you done this? Okay, right? Oh,
Yeah.
800 journeys. Oh, okay, cool. Like I'm
Right.
safe. There's a container. Like the realms that we're going to, and I haven't experienced it yet, but I
Yeah.
perceive that the birth realm is probably not that dissimilar to those
I would say it's, yeah. Uh,
What's it like? I had an experience where I went hunting when I first got here to Texas, and I shot a wild boar.
mhm.
Did a podcast all about it, of course. Um, and when that experience, I mean, it's a long story, and I won't get into it because I've already done a show about it. But the moment when that happened, there was this etheric, strange slowing of time, and this energy that came over me that was psychedelic is not the right word because that implies you're seeing visuals or something, but there was a tangible energy in the air that was so profoundly moving and intense. Like the
Yeah.
moment that animal died. And I mean,
Yeah.
I was crying and just, breathing deeply and just, it was strange. It was super, super far out. And in that moment, I remember thinking, this is the same energy as when a baby's born. And I just felt like I just knew that, even though I've never been present for one other than my own. But it was just such a profoundly spiritual just deeply innate sense. It was
Yeah.
heavy.
Yeah.
It was so moving.
Yeah.
What's it like for you as someone who's sat in so many births? Do you see a correlation in that or that kind of medicine-y space? I mean, when a woman's in the final stages of labor and the baby's coming out, I mean,
Oh
is there
yeah.
an energy there? Is there
Absolutely. And I would argue that you've gone through this many times. You know, you've entered this physical plane many times.
right,
You know, so you're
right,
very familiar with what it is to see this take physical shape, right? To go from this 5D into the 3D. Like that's what we all want. Like we all say like we want to get to the 5D, right? But like we want to be here because this is where all of the magic happens. This is where the experience happens. This is where the eros happens. This is like where the lessons are learned, where the pleasure is felt, where the pain is felt, you know? So it's like you recognize that coming in and the leaving, which is the same,
right.
you know?
That's the sense I got,
It's the
and it
same.
wasn't, it was like, it was cognition, but it was just a knowing. I was like, oh, this is that space,
Yeah, and this
right?
boar, right, is that they're transitioning and I recognize that space and it is so moving because of what it is to get that gift to come into the 3D, you know, and we recognize how sacred that is. And so when I'm at birth, yeah, of course, you know, it is I cry every time. You know, like every time she's getting close, we know she's about to start pushing, her breathing changes, she's bearing down, she's going through this transformation, I start to feel that, you know, and everyone in the room starts to feel that and we're all holding that space and like I see everyone moving, you know, and I've even seen partners like start to sway and the midwife is moving and she's focused and like if there's siblings there, other children there, they start to get into that space. Everybody gets into that space. Um, and they feel that. And then the baby's out and there's this release. It's like this, you know, it's really
How many births have you been present
I don't
at?
know. I don't know.
Tons.
Everyone asks me that. I don't
I
know.
mean, you think like over 100 or
Yeah, maybe like around 120.
hmm.
I was doing about 4 or 5 a month for 6 years, and then I don't know. Now I'm doing about one a month and doing. I mean, I'm attending, being
Yeah,
present for.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Everyone asks, and I should know, but I don't
Wow.
think about it that way.
Wow. What an interesting life you have. Really. I mean, think about all the ways in which someone could spend their time and energy and
Yeah,
passion.
yeah,
That's a very unique way, I think. I mean, maybe it's not, in the whole human experience. I guess that's probably normal. There are people out there that are present for that experience a lot more than others. But I just think about, I always kind of put myself in the shoes of a guest, like, oh, what would that be like? I think, man, that's wild.
yeah,
That's wild.
yeah,
How you mentioned how resentment can build in a birth situation in which the masculine partner is not able to, for whatever reason, advocate for the mother giving birth, and there's kind of some resentment that, whether spoken or unspoken, that develops out of that. What are some of the other reasons you think why a birth experience between a couple can start to create conflict and separation after
yes.
the fact?
So, I mean, it all starts during the pregnancy. I mean, it might even come from preconception, you know, who knows? But what I can see tangibly going on is that, like, if the non-gestational parent, you know, the partner is not participating in the education process, right? They're not creating that containment during the pregnancy that the mother needs so she can fully surrender. Like, a woman should not be heavy in decision making during the birth. Like, she's the oracle. She's decided how it's going to go, and it's really about the masculine, you know, taking the action to make it so, you know, and to really support that. And so when that's not there, then the woman is in this kind of decision making space. She's stepping into the masculine space. She's not surrendering, and that is incredible. That can be incredibly frustrating, and that's really not how it should be for her. Um, and what I see happen a lot of when there's no completion, there's no resolution that comes out of the education process, a woman will subject herself to birthing in a hospital when she didn't really want to, because that is like the one thing that the partner could like not let go of, was this idea that like it is irresponsible to be out of a hospital for this birth. And so that duality that exists, that, I mean, that can just blow up, you know, between two people. Because if the woman has unsavory experience, which she most likely will in the hospital, then it would be it's attributed to his lack of containment for her and lack of trust in her oracle truth.
Wow. What about the other side of that where, because I think an important distinction there is you're saying the woman is the oracle and she's feeling into how she wants this experience to play out, conveys her preferences to her partner, and then her partner drops the ball and doesn't facilitate it
Yeah.
happening according to her wishes. What about when you have the supporting partner to the mother and their control issues move in and start superseding what the mother's own intuition and body relationship to self is indicating that they want? You see what I'm getting at? Like when you have the father, for example, that's being all super controlling and trying to dictate what that woman's going to do or not do and how the birth is going to go when it's not in fact their body that it's all happening
Oh yeah,
to
no,
and
it
with.
it creates a lot of turmoil, a lot of turmoil. And like just at the 25th hour, women have come to me and are just like, I like what what can I do? Like, is there any way to get this to change? And it's so much internal work that masculine has to do. Um, and then it starts to crop up like throughout postpartum and in the parenting journey, and the co-parenting can become very tumultuous when that was not resolved. I mean, the birth is an opportunity, the pregnancy is that opportunity to resolve that, which might be systemic in the relationship anyway. And this is a beautiful opportunity for both of them to dispel their fears, because that controlling behavior is just a reaction. It's a fear reaction. It's a trauma response to whatever, maybe their own birth. So I
Yeah,
always
totally.
invite people to
Totally.
go to revisit. Part of the homework in my course is revisiting your own birth, for both of them. And some people say I can't do that. I don't have, I don't. My parents are no longer with us. How do I access that? So it's through meditation and through journaling and perhaps through hypnotic regression, or different, or just talking about memories with me and whatever comes up for them. And so that is really the first step to figuring out where those fears might be coming from. Um,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, it's 3:53. We got to get you to the Austin airport
Yeah.
soon.
Soon.
I have one last question for you, though. Actually, it's three in one. Who have been three teachers or teachings that have influenced your work or your life that you might share with us?
Yeah. So, wow. Okay. So the first one that comes to mind is Amanda Francis. Are you familiar with her?
No, huh?
She, she teaches manifestation, and she works with money trauma. And I was really resistant to her when I first was introduced to her. This was a few years ago. And I was like, I worked through, I really went into that resistance around her. And I finally committed to doing the course. And, for me, the money trauma is so important because that is the root chakra. And so that's really what I was committed to accessing and understanding. And so when I went through this process of reconnecting and healing the root chakra, everything else opened up for me. Every other possibility opened up for me in all areas of my life. And so I really attribute so much of the awareness that I have now to her and
Wow,
her
cool.
teachings.
I want to check that
She's,
out.
yeah, she's incredible.
That sounds right up my alley. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and my parents, absolutely. I mean, just um, the framework that they've given me, either consciously or unconsciously, is what I chose. I mean, I chose them, coming in, and so I really attribute so much of my growth in this present moment to reflecting on what they have provided thus far and continue to do so every day. I mean, they're amazing mirrors for me, and then my daughter. Yeah,
Are your parents understanding of what you do and supportive?
they're incredibly supportive.
Wow.
I mean, it's like everything since childhood. It's like I remember in college, I was like, I'm leaving college for a year. I need to learn. Like, I have this conflict with eating meat. And like, the only way that I can continue to do so is if I like go and learn how to make sausage and kill sheep. And like, that's the only way that I'm allowed to eat meat, is if I would kill them on my own. So it was like one day they were like, you're leaving college, like your liberal arts college, to do what? And okay, fine. What do you need? How can we hold space for you? And they just have always believed in me. And having that has just been, I know it's such a blessing, but it's been monumental.
Oh, that's interesting. I relate to that too with the aforementioned hunting trip.
Yeah,
It was same kind of motivation. Just like I need to, if I'm going to do this, I need to connect to it more
totally,
fearlessly. Yeah.
totally. And I'm like that with,
So you killed sheep and made sausage out of them?
yeah, and
Damn.
cheese and pecorino and
Damn, girl.
yeah, it's been some time. I
That's
went back a
hardcore.
few times. It's a small farm in Abruzzo, a
Wow.
tiny mountain town, and yeah. And I told him, I was like, Nuncio, this is what I need to do. This is where I'm at, and he's like, all right, if you want to work, I'll teach you, you
Wow.
know.
So interesting. And then with your daughter, how old is she?
She's 6.
She's 6. So she's obviously aware of your profession and what you're into.
Totally.
How
Yeah.
how does she respond to your being a doula and an educator in birth?
She loves it. Like her idea of play, like she'll stuff her shirt with like towels or t-shirts and she'll walk around and pretend she's having a baby and like she squats and then she wants me to catch the baby and then she wants to
Oh my
breastfeed
God.
and um she helps me prepare placentas and she helps me with the encapsulation and I have photos of her birth and so periodically and then definitely on her birthday we look at all the photos. I have a book that I've printed, of the experience and so she looks through it and she understands
Wow,
what
that's
went down
powerful.
and yeah, she loves it. And
Wow.
she has not expressed an interest in like wanting to do this kind of work, but I do see that this aspect of her that is so drawn to justice is really like activated when we talk about this experience and this caretaking that comes through in her, and when the kittens, I have wild kittens and wild roosters and chickens and all kinds of animals in my garden that do not belong to me. They have just all
Really?
they all congregate in my garden. And yeah, she's always caretaking them and she's created her own system with them and
Really?
yeah,
That's so cool.
it's cool.
I find it interesting. Kelly, your friend Kelly Brogan,
Yeah.
when she was on the show a couple weeks ago, was telling me how she has chickens, and I'm like, you live in Miami. Like when I've been to Miami, I don't see any houses where you could have wild chickens and stuff in your yard. I guess there's other neighborhoods I'm not aware of
I
there.
live in Little Haiti and they're all wild. I mean, there's like 12 wild roosters and then
Really?
there's all these hens and they just fly in and they just live around my property and they lay eggs and sometimes I'll enjoy the eggs and then sometimes not and there's baby
Wow.
chicks and
That's
cats
so
and
cool.
iguanas and all kinds of stuff
I got a
going
friend
on.
that eats iguanas.
I know people who eat iguana.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I've
Daniel
never got.
Vitalis, he's a big hunter gatherer
Hmm.
and whatnot, and yeah, he goes down to Florida and hunts them and puts them in a cooler and takes them back
Yeah.
and makes tacos out of them in Maine.
Wow.
He says they're
Well,
delicious,
when they
and it's highly
become
encouraged because they're invasive and they
totally.
cause a lot of problems down there. So
Totally. Yeah,
he's doing
people
everyone a
seize that
favor.
opportunity when the temperature drops in Miami, they freeze. Iguanas stop moving. They go into
Oh,
paralysis and so then they'll collect them and
so that's a thing down there too?
yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, I've never tried reptile. I like there's certain things.
I haven't either. But you think like the funny thing with food like that is I'll eat a lobster. It's like a
Right.
giant cockroach, and it's like, oh, it's delicious. Don't even think about it. I'm like, ew, an iguana. It's just funny how we build these sort of perspectives based on
Totally.
nothing. It's funny.
Yeah, same with birth.
Well, thank you so much for making the time to come out. I've been wanting to meet you for a while, and I want to tell people we'll put it in the show notes at
Yeah.
lukestory.com/birth. But tell people your Instagram because I think that's a really like that's how I found you, and I was like, oh, this woman is awesome. I have to talk to her. And there's a lot of not only like educational stuff and that, but there's a lot of beautiful photography that's pretty, I mean, I don't want to say graphic, like there's something profane about it, but it's like, man, if you want to like see what birth is really like, especially in a home setting, that's a good place to do it.
Yeah. Eyla Cuenca birth.
Cool.
And I also have a Telegram channel.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna join, and it's all about this stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna join your channel.
Eyla Cuenca birth. I get a little more free on there.
Yeah, my Instagram is like love and light, rainbows and unicorns, and then my Telegram group is like we're all gonna die, do something. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah, my whole thing
Yeah.
is like I post a lot more about legislation and things like that around
Okay.
birth and And then my website. I have a lot of free resources on my website.
Cool. And if people wanted to either go through some of your education or work with you, they would do that through your site?
Yeah, or you can go to uncoveringbirth.com and
Oh,
then you
okay.
can access the courses there. And there's a doula birthkeeper training there as well. So if you want to get more specific with what you're offering and you want to go more into advocacy and informed consent and then training partners in this process, then I would highly recommend the birthkeeper and doula training.
Awesome. All right, we'll
Yeah.
put all that in the show notes. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.